Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice a week I aim to be your trusted source for insightful discussions on property investment, wealth creation, money, and the broader economic trends shaping the Australian markets. Now, regular listeners would know I usually have a guest on this show, but every now and then I like to have a chat, just you and me, when I want to discuss a very important topic with you. And today is one of those shows. Today I want to give you my thoughts on a topic that's been dominating headlines and sparking debates across the country. Housing affordability. It's a subject that stirs up strong emotions, doesn't it? Especially as the dream of home ownership seems to be slipping further out of reach for many Australians. But here's the question that I think you really need to ask. Do we really want houses to be more affordable? On the surface, it seems like an obvious yes. Who wouldn't want more people to have access to their housing market? But when we dig deeper, we uncover a complex web of economic, social and political factors that make the issue far more complicated than it appears. So in today's episode, I want to explore these nuances with you. We'll look at the broader implications of making housing more affordable, discuss who really benefits from rising property prices, and we're going to consider what it would take to genuinely address the affordability crisis. So whether you're a homeowner, an investor, or somebody just looking to break into the market, this conversation is one you won't want to miss. So let's get on with the show.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment, and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's authority in wealth creation through property, who has been voted one of Australia's top 50 most influential thought leaders.
In Australia, the dream of home ownership's become increasingly elusive, hasn't it? With skyrocketing property prices, the affordability crisis is on the topic of everyone's lips, and I'm sure as the year goes on and next year with being an election year, politicians, media outlets and everyday Australians are going to keep talking about how to make housing more affordable. But I don't think it's as simple as some people suggest. Now, before you think I'm an affluent property investor who doesn't really understand the plight of first-home buyers, let me give you a disclaimer. In my blended family, I have 6 children and 12 grandchildren, so I fully understand how difficult it is for young people to get into the property market. And I still remember the challenges I had many, many years ago when I first got into the property market. So I really am sympathetic to the concerns of those who want to get a foot on the property ladder. But if you want houses to be more affordable, I think it's important to understand what it really takes to address this complex issue. So that's why I'm having this one-on-one chat with you today. And as I said in the introduction, no guests. So how do you make property more affordable? Well, in my mind, there's really only 2 ways. First of all, you can give home buyers more money to spend on property. You can either increase their wages or hand out grants or incentives, maybe things like reducing stamp duty. Unfortunately, this only works in the short term and for a select few buyers, because both these sort of measures encourage people to spend the extra money they've had available. We've seen this time and time again, and that just pushes up property prices because they've got more money in their pocket to be able to pay those higher prices, and that makes properties even more unaffordable for the next round of buyers. Okay, the other way is to decrease the value of properties. Now, we currently have around 11 million private dwellings in Australia with a total value of around $10.7 trillion, with on average 2.52 occupants in each house. Now, we know almost 70% of these are owned by ordinary Australians as their homes, and they don't want the value of their properties to decrease either. So who wants property prices to fall? I think it falls into 2 groups, particularly first-home buyers wanting to get into the market but having difficulty saving a deposit. Many of them can afford the mortgage repayments, and saving the 20% deposit for homes that are more expensive. That's the challenge for many. And the second group who want prices to fall, in my mind, are Australians wanting to get into property investment, but they feel they're priced out of good property markets around Australia. But if you think about it, both those groups only want property prices to fall for a short while, don't they? Until they can afford to buy a property, then they want property prices to increase again. They don't want prices to keep falling further once they're into the market, do they? Okay, So what could make properties more affordable? Well, for properties to become more affordable to a wide range of buyers, property values would have to fall significantly. Look, by this I mean we'll need more than just the typical cyclical corrections that happen in property values as the cycle moves on. Of course, you've got to remember that at the end of every property price growth cycle, property values moderate. In some areas they moderate, in some areas they stagnate, in other areas property values even fall. But I'm saying that if we're wanting to create affordability, property values are going to need to drop considerably, meaning that, I don't know, how does it happen? People are going to be forced to sell up their homes at a time when there just won't be anyone willing to buy them or able to buy them, and that'll make property prices drop significantly. Okay, well, what could cause this to happen? Well, really, that's a property crash, isn't it? And for that to occur, we're going to require one of a number of things. A severe recession could cause this, leading to significant unemployment high enough to trigger forced home sales. Now, that's not going to happen anytime soon. We're not going to fall into a recession in Australia. Okay, what else could cause property values to crash? Well, a severe credit squeeze where the banks don't lend you money, or if interest rates kept rising even further, causing a raft of mortgage defaults. But that's unlikely to happen now that inflation's slowly coming under control. Okay, another thing that can cause property prices to drop significantly is a significant oversupply of properties. And we know this won't happen in the next few years, will it? As we're just not building enough dwellings for our growing population, and there's already a huge undersupply. I've discussed this over and over in the podcast, so I'm not going to repeat myself with that. Another thing that could make property prices crash, well, fall a bit, is a halt to immigration, as our rising population has been underpinning property demand, hasn't it? And while the government's talking about tinkering at the edges a little bit or stopping foreign students coming, they're not really buying properties, are they? So I'm not sure that's going to be a factor in the next little while. Of course, others suggest a substantial slowdown in foreign property investment could make property values drop a lot, even though it's at the sort of levels today that really aren't making a difference. Foreign investors aren't at the levels they were a number of years ago. And I guess maybe a major change in government legislation that affects property could affect property values. Now, let me be clear, I'm not suggesting any of the above will occur. In fact, we don't want them to. The consequences would be terrible. I'm just pointing out what would have to happen to make property values drop significantly to make them more affordable to a wide group of people. Okay, well, what about the simplistic view of just build more homes? That's what everyone's saying, isn't it? I mean, that's one of the most common solutions people are coming up with. I mean, the logic seems sound at first glance. If supply outpaces demand, prices should fall, right? While there's some truth to this, the reality is far more nuanced. With increased housing supply, it's part of the puzzle if we increase housing supply. It's not really the silver bullet many will believe it is. Here's why. Location matters. Building homes in areas where people don't want to live won't solve the problem. Most Australians are drawn to certain locations for employment, for lifestyle and amenities, and cheaper locations where land is cheap, building homes in the less desirable areas way out in the outer suburbs or the new suburbs won't relieve demand in the high demand zones. So again, it's simplistic to say build more homes. Okay, what about building more apartments? Well, if you build the apartments that the federal government's policy is suggesting, let's build 1.2 million new dwellings, a lot of the medium density apartments in the inner and middle ring suburbs, that's where the land is more expensive. And then construction techniques of building multi-storey apartments is the most expensive way of building things compared to houses. So that's not going to make properties more affordable, even though it will increase supply. I guess what I'm trying to explain is that increasing supply is a little bit simplistic. Because even if we build more homes in the right areas without the necessary infrastructure like transport, schools, healthcare facilities and other amenities, these areas just won't be sustainable. People need more than just a roof over their heads. They need a community and infrastructure to support their lives. And I guess another factor that's slowing down this concept of building more dwellings is local zoning laws and regulations that are making it difficult to increase housing densities in areas where people actually want to live. You know, that NIMBY story, not in my backyard, or even notes, not over there either. Changing these laws isn't an easy task, can take years, if not decades, to have a meaningful impact. I know some local councils are now starting to recognise the need to densify their suburbs, and that's good. Okay, well, let's look at some of the economic realities about making houses more affordable, because the Australian property market isn't just influenced by local supply and demand, it's also shaped by a much broader range of economic factors. One of the big ones is the growing disparity between wages and property prices. Incomes simply haven't kept pace with the rapid rise in property values, making home ownership increasingly unaffordable for many Australians. I remember when I first bought my home in the 1980s, I think the median house price was 3 times or so the median wage. Today it's 7 or 8 times that. So without a significant growth in wages or a dramatic drop in property prices, affordability is going to remain a challenge. What I'm trying to discuss with you at the moment then is a number of economic realities that shows much more than just supply and demand, building more dwellings that's going to fix the problem. I mean, interest rates are one of the issues, aren't they? Interestingly, the 12 interest rate increases we suffered over the last couple of years haven't really quelled our housing markets. And as interest rates gradually fall over the next couple of years, and they will, I'm not saying it's going to take a couple of years for them to start falling, but they'll fall over a period of time, that's only going to make borrowing cheaper, fueling demand for properties and pushing up prices more. Okay, what about investor activity? Sure, investors play a significant role in the Australian property market, with about a third of all properties being owned by mum and dad rental property providers. But they're fulfilling the need that the government is unable to supply. While investors have been blamed for pushing out first-home buyers from the market, it's investors who have underpinned the development of many of the apartment towers required to supply the accommodation that we desperately need. In my mind, restricting investor activity might help in the short term, but it would also reduce the overall supply of rental properties, leading to higher rentals and making it more difficult for first-home buyers to save a deposit, because they're going to just have to pay higher rents for the fewer properties that are available for rent. And remember, tenants are tenants not just because they're poor, not always because they're waiting to get in the property market, but because of the stage of the life they're at, as we've discussed so frequently in this podcast. Okay, what about foreign investment? How much of a role does that play? Well, I think despite that being hotly debated, some arguing that foreign investment drives up prices, others would suggest that in the past cycles, foreign investors contribute to the economy by helping fund all those new developments, the off-the-plan developments that they never even moved into because they're not living here, but they supplied accommodation for Australians that were necessary. So I guess striking the right balance of foreign investment is crucial. But it's not as simple as that still. There are social and political implications. Making housing more affordable isn't just an economic issue. As I say, there are those social and political implications, and being an election year, I can see politicians are going to have quite some challenging times. Let's look at a couple of these considerations. Approximately 70% of Australians either own their home outright or are paying them off. This significant majority has got a vested interest in seeing property values maintain their levels. Really, they're wanting them to increase, aren't they? And the government's acutely aware of the wealth effect that comes from rising property values. When people feel wealthier, they encourage them to spend. It stimulates the economy. On the other side, if property values start to fall, it could lead to a significant downturn in the economy as homeowners tighten their belts, and this would lead to reduced consumer confidence, consumer spending, potentially triggering a broader economic downturn. No government or political party wants to see that happening. Okay, as I said, there's a number of political issues at play. The other one is the first home buyer dilemma. While first home owners are struggling to enter the market due to higher prices, as I said before, once they secure a property, their priorities often shift. After all, no one wants to see the value of their largest investment, their home, decrease. This creates a paradox where everyone wants affordable housing until they own a home, at which point maintaining or increasing property values becomes their goal. So let's look at the two types of property that there are. There are established properties. These are typically owner-occupied properties in the desirable, well-established suburbs. Given that the majority of Australians own or are paying off these types of homes, there's little appetite for politicians to cause the value of these type of properties to decrease in value. Any significant drop in the value of established properties, as I said, would have a ripple effect on the economy, impacting everything from consumer confidence to retirement savings. Okay, so one type of property is established properties, the other is new properties in outer suburbs. And in general, these are aimed at first home buyers. These new developments come, though, with their own set of challenges. The land may not be as expensive, even though the cost of land and subdivision and the infrastructure is quite expensive. And then there's the construction costs. But due to government taxes, levies, and various forms of red tape and green tape, the cost of a new home could include about 30% of the cost would be taxes. That added cost of development inevitably passed on to the buyer, making new homes less affordable than they could be. Okay, I've come up with a lot of challenges. What needs to change? Now, clearly it's not going to be simple, but if we really want to make houses affordable, let me just go through a couple of ideas of what could make that happen. I mean, planning is one of them. We need a coordinated approach that involves all levels of government, the private sector and the community. This includes not just building more homes, but ensuring that these homes are in the right locations and supported by adequate infrastructure. Zoning reforms need to change too. Local governments need to be more flexible with zoning laws to allow higher density housing in desirable locations. As I said, this will require them overcoming the NIMBY attitudes, not in my backyard, and ensuring new developments are well integrated into existing communities. There's lots of government land also that the government could rezone for new accommodation as well. I mean, we also have to reduce the cost of development. The high cost of new development in the outer suburbs, as I said, is partly due to government taxes, levies and regulatory hurdles. If they could streamline these processes and reduce the financial burden on developers, this could help bring down the cost of new homes, making them more affordable for new home buyers. I think the government needs to invest in affordable housing. It used to in the past. It used to provide public housing. It used to provide community housing. It used to provide social housing. And in Australia, the government stopped doing that. It's building a little bit of new public housing to make up for the old public housing that's now past its use-by date. But every time they do that, they're pulling down old public housing. They're not keeping even the same percentage of social housing and public housing around. But the government could become a developer, not making a profit, using government land, using government resources to provide affordable accommodation. If it wanted to. It's not though, is it? And maybe the last way of making the property markets more affordable is encouraging economic growth. I mean, ultimately, housing affordability is closely tied to the broader economy. Policies that promote wages growth, reduce unemployment, create economic opportunities, that's going to help more Australians save and be able to afford a home. So, if you want houses to be more affordable, as I started off by explaining, it's important to recognise there's not going to be a simple solution. I see it requiring a multifaceted approach that addresses supply, demand, economic conditions and social factors. Look, it's a complex challenge, but I hope with the right policies and commitment to change, we can make housing more affordable for future generations of Australia. I have never, in my 50 years in property, seen a situation as dire, as bad as this, where affordability for home buyers is so bad, and at the same time, rental affordability, vacancy is so bad, and vacancy rates are so low, and there's no end in sight, as I've mentioned each time we discuss this topic on the podcast, because we're just not building enough accommodation. The only way we're going to build more accommodation, of course, is when it's financially viable for developers to do so. And that's not going to happen until the gap between the established properties today and the cost of developing new dwellings narrows. The gap is too big at the moment. It costs too much more to buy a new apartment, a new dwelling, a new home, a new townhouse, so people are buying established properties. Developers aren't building. In due course, as the cycle moves on, established property values will increase, and as they do and the gap becomes smaller between those new properties, then the cycle will move on and new developments will come out of the ground. So I guess that really suggests that properties are not going to become more affordable in the next little while. I mean, if you can buy properties today at below replacement cost, I see that as a window of opportunity at the moment. So the reality is that any solution for the affordability crisis really has to balance the needs of those looking to enter the market with the interests of those already invested in it. And I can't see politicians creating a situation where the value of the homes of 70% of Australians falls. I don't know. Let's see. Only time will tell. I hope you got some insights into the challenges we're going to have with housing affordability. And if you got some benefit from today's show and you don't currently subscribe to the show, just stop for a second on whichever podcast app you're listening to this, or if you're listening to it on YouTube, and subscribe so twice a week you get information from my guests and me about property investment, success and money. By the way, I've got another podcast that's become very, very popular that ranks amongst the top podcasts in business in Australia on Apple Podcasts every week, and that's my weekly Demographics Decoded podcast with Simon Kirstenmacher. It's not specifically about property, but it's telling you about it's a crystal ball to our future, really, because demographics drives our markets, not just property, but business and the economy and housing. So I suggest you, again, stop for 1 sec, look for Demographics Decoded. I'll leave a link in the show notes, but look for that and subscribe on your podcast app and have a listen to the wisdom that Simon brings. Now, in a moment, I'm going to share my mindset moment with you, but I hope the message you got from my chat a moment ago was that despite the politicians and the media talking about affordability and how we're going to have to change things, the property markets are really too big to fail and too big for significant alterations. Now, I don't know the answer. I don't like the fact that many Australians are having difficulty getting into the housing market. Having said that, though, I'm not paid to change that. I'm not a politician. Let's see what they come up with. But in the meantime, there's no doubt that property values are going to keep increasing based on supply and demand. But there's also lots of other factors continuously in the media. So if you're feeling a bit uncertain about the market, you're not alone. Many of the property investors I speak with are in the same boat because they're bombarded with conflicting information. So they're unsure. Should they do something? Shouldn't they? I mean, the common obstacles are information overload. They're flooded with different information. Every article, expert and report seems to have a different opinion, and it makes it easy for people to feel paralysed and unsure of what to do. The second issue is there are just too many opinions out there and too little clarity. You've probably heard the saying that opinions are like belly buttons. Everyone's got one, but basically they're useless. And at the moment, everyone seems to be a property expert eager to give you their opinions. But my question to you is, how many of these so-called experts have actually weathered multiple property cycles? Many are just repeating data without the perspective to understand the bigger picture. The truth is, most of these opinions are based on data explaining what's already happened. It's a bit like looking in the rear vision mirror, isn't it? You need forward-looking perspective so you can be guided into what's ahead through the current uncertainties towards financial independence. And I know a lot of people are worried about making the wrong move. Fear is a natural reaction to uncertainty. It can make us hesitate. It can make us second-guess ourselves. But I've also noticed it ultimately means people are missing opportunities. Remember Warren Buffett's famous quote, "Be fearful when others are greedy and be greedy when others are fearful." Right now, while others are hesitating, I see there's a unique opportunity to position yourself for the market, to get ahead of the herd, because as I mentioned a moment ago, interest rates are going to come down, and all that's going to mean is properties are going to become more affordable, more people are going to get into the market, and that's just going to push the next level of property values up. So it all goes back to what I initially started this whole show about, how we're going to help affordability. There's just not enough properties for the people, and as inflation comes under control and interest rates come down, prices are going to go up, and it's a bit of a spiral. But you should be worried about making a mistake. In fact, unless you've got a solid plan, you're probably going to feel a bit lost. I know the property market's going to create significant wealth for some over the next year, but only for those who, in my mind, approach it with a well-thought-out strategy. You've heard me say so often that 50% of investors sell up in the first 5 years, and those who stay in the market, only 92% of them ever get past their first or second property. And why? Well, wealth doesn't just happen. It's a result of deliberate planning and execution. And that's why each week I mention to you about the importance to plan in my podcasts. So whether you're a beginner or an experienced investor, not too late to put down your thoughts and planning. Now, buying a property is not a plan. Getting finance in place is not a plan. Having a proper plan will help you define your goals, assess whether your goals are even realistic for your timeline. It'll help you track your progress. See if you're on the right track. Have you put your ladder up against the right wall or not? Because you've heard me, I guess, in the past also say that it takes 20, even 30 years to become financially independent, because most investors spend the first 5-10 years doing the wrong thing. I've been there. I've done that. We've all made mistakes over time. So a strategic plan should help you define your goals, assess whether they're realistic, track your progress, and then identify risks and mitigate risks that you may not have considered. That way you're going to maximize your wealth safely. And the real benefit is you should be able to outperform the market. So while some markets are stagnant at the moment, others are doing better. We know we've actually got a 3-tiered market around Australia. That's going to change in time. My suggestion is that it's not hard to outperform the averages by having the right knowledge, having the right team around you. So I'm going to now, after all that long discussion, just to help encourage you to take advantage of the market, suggest that you have a chat with my team at Metropole. And what we'll do is put a plan together for you. But let me just remind you that a plan should have a number of facets to it: an asset accumulation strategy, a manufacturing capital growth strategy. You know I like doing renovations and development. A rental growth strategy, an asset protection and tax minimisation strategy, a finance strategy including long-term debt reduction, and then how to eventually live off your property portfolio strategy. You've got to begin with the end in mind and work backwards. So after that long discussion about how you could take advantage of this stage of the property cycle, may I suggest don't try and do it on your own. Get a team around you, and my team at Metropole would love to use our very powerful software to help you build a plan to become the person you plan to become. By the way, you have ongoing access to the software so you can do all the what-ifs. Go to metropole.com.au and have a chat with my team.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
I'd like to have a chat with you about 3 types of people you must avoid if you want to become successful, rich, wealthy. Now, one of the most important decisions we make in life is who we choose to be around. In fact, there's an old proverb that says something along the lines of, show me your friends and I'll tell you who you are. I remember one of my early mentors, the late Jim Rohn, said it well. He said, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Based on that, we must be cautious about who we surround ourselves with, because it's got short and long-term implications. Of course, we need people, whether they're mentors, friends, family. We would need people who are going to challenge us, who are going to make us better, thereby raising our average, helping us reach heights that we deserve. Now, I know many entrepreneurs, business people and investors who strive to be the smartest person in the room. But if you're always the smartest person in the room, you're in trouble. You need to surround yourself with people who can run circles around you in as many areas as possible. People who can exponentially improve you. They're much better than you in a variety of ways. They're going to help you grow to the next level. But at the same time, you'll need to learn to avoid certain types of people as well. Think of the people with whom you interact on a regular basis. Have you ever met Mr. Negative, the critic, the victim? Now, I bet you're picturing one of those folks right now. I know I am. You'll find them everywhere. Some of them, there's all those permanent property pessimists, the negative Nellies. Others torpedo your business ideas or your career goals. By the way, I hope you never see one of those when you look in the mirror. You see, pessimists spread negativity like the flu, I guess like coronavirus, so you must limit your exposure to them. The risk in listening to these naysayers is that your own thoughts might slowly begin to echo what these other people are saying, because they've got the power to adversely affect not only your outlook, but how high you aim to achieve. So let's have a closer look at these three types of people, so you're going to be able to sidestep them where possible. Now, the first one's Mr. Negative. Now, it could be Mrs. Negative as well. I'm not trying to be sexist here, but Mr. Negative seems to have a problem for every solution, and they love to drain the enthusiasm from any new idea. They'll say things like, oh, that can't be done, or that won't happen, or maybe you can't get rich investing through property. I know people who've lost all their money through property. Mr. and Mrs. Negative is going to suck you into their negative world. And when a window of opportunity opens for you, they're going to pull it down. They're going to pull down the blind so you won't see it. Worse than zap, they'll zap your energy and slow down your momentum. You can't expect to lead a positive life if you surround yourself with negative people. The second sort of person to avoid are the critics. Critics are known for finding something derogatory to say about everybody, and they're especially famous for trading confidential or negative information about others. Do you know somebody like that? You know, they like to gossip. They like to control small-minded people. Critics use gossip to get in control of people. So make sure you're never tempted to engage in those sort of shenanigans, because for them, everyone's fair game, including you. If they're going to talk about other people behind their backs, what are they going to say about you behind your backs? Think about it. I mean, critics are threatened by successful people, by talented people, and the greater the success, the louder their criticism, which they hope will draw the spotlight away from their own unimpressive results. So never let anyone who's done nothing tell you how you should do things. The third type of person to avoid are the victims. You know the type. They never accept personal responsibility for anything that's happened to them. Life is chronically unfair for victims, isn't it? It's not their fault. It's never their fault. It's the boss's fault, the government's fault, the system's fault, or the bank's fault they wouldn't lend me money. The deck's always stacked against victims, and they've got nothing but bad luck. They haven't figured out yet that hard work puts you in the place where good luck can find you, and they're famous for putting in very little effort. If you're around somebody with a cold or the flu, you're likely to catch the cold or the flu. I guess in today's world, if you're around somebody with coronavirus, you're likely to catch coronavirus. So what are you catching from the people around you? Do everything in your power to surround yourself with the right people, because their character traits, their habits, they're contagious, but in a good way. Look for the encouragers and the believers and the high energy movers and shakers who don't have the word can't in their vocabulary. Surround yourself with people who dream bigger than you do, people who believe anything is possible. And you know what? They'll believe in you. Of course, it's also critical to watch your own attitude. We can't always change the people or circumstances in our lives, but we can change our response. So excellence isn't a skill. It's an attitude, and positive thinking breeds rich habits. And you know I'm into rich habits. I've written a book with Tom Corley about rich habits, poor habits, because that's what makes you successful in all areas of your life. I've heard it said that success is never owned, it's rented, and the rent is due every day. So my suggestion to you is build the right team of people around you, and they'll help you pay the rent. Thank you for spending the last little while with me. I hope you got some benefit from this show. Hey, but before you move on to the next podcast you're hoping to listen to, please let me remind you that I have another show that I produce once a week with leading demographer Simon Kirstenmacher that we call Demographics Decoded, where we unveil the trends that are going to shape your future. This is a must-listen to podcast for anyone interested in property investment, business or entrepreneurship. So if you don't currently subscribe to Demographics Decoded, please stop for a second and subscribe on your favourite podcast app or on YouTube. Now, if you did enjoy today's show and you know somebody else who'd benefit, please tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast and Demographics Decoded. There's a share button on every podcast app. On Apple Podcast, there are 3 little buttons at the top of the player. Or just talk to them, tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast. I hope you're going to be doing them a favour. You're definitely going to be doing me a favour in helping in my quest to make as many people as possible financially literate. Now, you can catch up with me in between these shows on social media, or you can join my private Facebook group. Just go to Facebook and look for the Property Update Facebook group. And I've got a special bonus for you to say thank you for subscribing. Just go to podcastbonus.com.au. There's a link in the show notes, podcastbonus.com.au, where I've got a bunch of ebooks and reports. That's my way of saying thank you to you for taking the time to listen. Oh, by the way, if you haven't listened to the many podcast episodes we've already got, we're well into our 600s of episodes now. You can always listen to the old episodes which each have lessons about property investment, success and money. Once again, thanks for listening to today's show.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?